We are now standing directly inside a 72-hour window that will dictate the course of human history for the next half century. The dominoes are falling so incredibly fast that the traditional media apparatus simply cannot keep up with the sheer volume of geopolitical collapse occurring in real time. But the most terrifying fracture happening right this second isn't occurring in the bombed-out streets of Tehran. It is happening right inside the so-called unified Western alliance. Look closely at the rapidly deteriorating relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv. The carefully constructed, public-facing facade of an unbreakable, completely unified allied front is actively shattering into a million pieces. The White House, terrified by the skyrocketing oil prices and the catastrophic failure of their decapitation strategy, is desperately, frantically searching for an emergency exit. They are looking for an off-ramp, any possible diplomatic excuse to declare a hollow, superficial victory and pull back before the global economy completely vaporizes into thin air. But the Israeli Prime Minister's office has completely different plans, and they just released a public statement that should absolutely freeze the blood in your veins. They didn't talk about mutual de-escalation. They didn't mention diplomatic treaties or back-channel negotiations. Instead, they publicly, officially vowed to systematically target and eliminate every single successor of the Khamenei bloodline. I need you to really absorb the gravity of those words. Every single successor. That is not a standard, limited military objective. That is a permanent, open-ended blank check for a perpetual, never-ending generational war. It explicitly places absolutely no upper limit on the scope, the geography, or the duration of this conflict. While the American president is looking for a parachute, Tel Aviv is actively pouring thousands of gallons of high-octane gasoline directly onto the fire. And right now, as you watch this, the United States Secretary of State is sitting on a heavily armored government jet descending into Israeli airspace, carrying the completely impossible task of trying to put a diplomatic leash on an allied nation that genuinely believes it is fighting a holy war for its literal survival. The massive, glaring crack in the Western alliance isn't just showing, it is splitting wide open, and the IRGC commanders are watching every single second of it, laughing in the shadows. But even that unfolding diplomatic nightmare completely pales in comparison to the apocalyptic, radioactive shadow currently hanging over this entire war. The entire foundational justification for Operation Epic Fury, the specific reason the stealth bombers were launched, the reason American soldiers are currently dying in the Gulf, was to preemptively destroy the Iranian nuclear breakout capability. The Pentagon told the world that the breakout timeline had shrunk from years to months to mere weeks. But what if they were already too late? What if the bombs dropped on February 28th didn't actually stop a nuclear weapons program, but merely avenged one that was already fully completed? This coming Friday, March 13th, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, the CTVTO, is scheduled to formally release a highly classified, heavily redacted, full seismic analysis. This report focuses on a deeply mysterious, highly anomalous underground seismic event that was recorded by incredibly sensitive monitoring stations exactly 8 months ago. Where was it recorded? Deep in the desolate, heavily guarded deserts southeast of Isfahan, the absolute beating heart of Iran's uranium conversion and enrichment infrastructure. For 8 long months, the international community has nervously written this anomaly off as a localized natural tectonic earthquake. But the classified whispers rapidly leaking out of Geneva this morning are absolutely terrifying. We are talking about highly specialized sensors detecting the distinct sharp P-wave signatures that typically only occur when an artificial, perfectly symmetrical explosion violently vaporizes solid rock deep underground. If that impending Friday seismic report officially confirms that the anomalous event was in fact a successful underground nuclear test detonation, it instantly rewrites the entire geopolitical reality of the human race. It means the United States just launched a massive, regime-changing military invasion against a hostile nation that already possesses the absolute ultimate weapon. If that report confirms a nuclear test, every single piece of pre-war Western intelligence is instantly invalidated. The entire justification for the war collapses, and we are officially dealing with nuclear-armed, IRGC-controlled, radicalized military dictatorship that has absolutely nothing left to lose. And yet, despite this towering apocalyptic mountain of hard evidence, you still have the so-called professional experts, the polished think tank analysts, and the former national security advisors sitting in their plush, air-conditioned offices, staring into the camera on daytime television and aggressively peddling the delusional fantasy of a diplomatic opening. They are actually sitting there with a completely straight face, desperately arguing that because the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has no documented public record, he might secretly be easier to negotiate with behind closed doors. They are aggressively peddling the absolute fairy tale that the IRGC, the exact same hyper-violent organization that just seized total, absolute control of the government while actively absorbing thousands of American bombs, is suddenly going to sit down at a mahogany table in Switzerland and sign a peace treaty. It is a staggering, borderline criminal level of cognitive dissonance. These analysts are so deeply, desperately addicted to maintaining the comforting illusion of a rules-based international order that they are willingly blinding themselves to the absolute, undeniable, brutal reality on the ground. The peace window hasn't just narrowed. It hasn't been complicated by current events. It has been violently, permanently welded shut by a radical military faction that genuinely, truly believes they are currently fulfilling a divine apocalyptic mandate to destroy the West. We are no longer operating in a timeline of months or years. We are strictly operating in a timeline of hours. I need you to pull out a calendar right now and mark down exactly what is about to happen, because the next 3 days are guaranteed to be the most volatile, dangerously unpredicted, able period in modern financial and military history. Tonight, the Iranian parliament is holding a mandatory, heavily guarded emergency session to formally rubber stamp their absolute allegiance to the new supreme leader. Whatever Mojtaba dictates in that room will become the final, irreversible blueprint for their military escalation. If he mentions the Strait of Hormuz, the global markets will immediately crash in pre-market trading. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the United Nations Security Council is convening a frantic emergency high-level session in New York. Do not expect any salvation to come from that room. I need you to specifically watch the Chinese and Russian ambassadors, watch their body language, listen to the exact meticulously translated phrasing they use when they inevitably veto any Western resolution that attempts to legitimize the American strikes. They will formally, publicly cement the shadow alliance that is actively preparing to drag the entire globe into this fight. And then we hit Friday, the CTBTO seismic report, the day the entire world finally finds out if we are fighting a conventional regional war or a terrifyingly active nuclear one. The dominoes have already been tipped over. The global energy markets are actively buckling under the pressure. The international supply chains are violently fracturing. The American diplomatic shield has been shattered on the world stage. And an ultra-radical military junta has just officially hijacked one of the most heavily armed, strategically located nations on the face of the planet. The comfortable, predictable world you lived in just 10 days ago is completely gone. And it is never coming back. You are currently watching the violent, fiery birth of a brand new, incredibly dangerous global order. And the mainstream corporate media is absolutely terrified to tell you the unfiltered truth about how bad it is actually going to get. If the IRGC makes a single credible move toward blockading the Strait of Hormuz tonight. If they drop one single naval mine into that water, the economic devastation that will hit your hometown will be nothing short of biblical. You cannot afford to be blind in this critical moment. You cannot afford to rely on sanitized corporate news anchors reading government-approved teleprompters that are designed to keep you pacified. This channel is entirely dedicated to tearing down that facade, exposing the leaked intelligence documents, and giving you the raw, unfiltered, terrifying reality of what is actually happening behind the geopolitical curtain. The absolute next 48 hours will permanently determine the fate of the global economy and the lives of thousands of deployed military personnel. When the true Iranian policy drops tonight, I will be the very first one to break it down line by excruciating line. When the UN Security Council completely devolves into political chaos tomorrow, I will show you exactly what the Chinese ambassador is secretly signaling to his allies. And when that highly classified seismic nuclear report is nally declassified on Friday, I will go through it page by agonizing page so you know exactly what is coming. You need to be prepared, you need to be deeply informed, and you need to know exactly what is coming for your family, your savings, and your future. Hit the subscribe button right now. Turn on every single notification. Do not look away for a second. The point of no return is officially here. I will see you in the very next update. While the Western media is completely hypnotized by the flaming wreckage of Operation Epic Fury and the cascading, terrifying collapse of the global energy markets, they are entirely missing the most dangerous, the most sinister, and the most terrifyingly quiet movement happening in the background of this entire war. Look past the smoke rising over Tehran. Look past the flashing red numbers on Wall Street. I need you to focus your attention on the two massive geopolitical elephants sitting dead quietly in the room. Because at the exact moment the Iranian state television network cut to black to announce the heavily militarized installation of Mojtaba Khamenei as the undisputed radical supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, two of the most powerful capitals on the face of the earth went completely uniformly silent. Beijing and Moscow have not uttered a single solitary word of condemnation. If you understand anything about high-level, high-stakes international diplomacy, you know that absolute silence is never an accident. Silence is a weapon. Silence is a meticulously calculated, highly coordinated statement. In the brutal arena of global power politics, when a hostile military faction seizes total control of a heavily armed nation in the middle of a blazing war with the United States, and the leaders of Russia and China simply look the other way, that is not neutrality. That is a deafening, unquestionable form of endorsement. They are watching the United States bleed, and they are silently holding the door open for the new Iranian regime. But it gets so much deeper and so much darker than just diplomatic silence. I am about to share a piece of leaked intelligence with you that should be the lead story on every single major news network in the world right now, but it has been completely buried. On the very morning of the Supreme Leader's shadow coronation, before Mojtaba Khamenei ever stepped in front of a television camera to address his own citizens, before he issued his terrifying declaration of war to the West, and long before his diplomats contacted the United Nations, his very first act as the absolute ruler of Iran was completely invisible to the public, according to highly classified intercepts leaked by underground independent journalists. Mojtaba's first communication was a heavily encrypted, private, direct message delivered through secure back channels straight to the top levels of the governments in China and Russia. Think about the sheer magnitude of that sequence. America and the UN were left entirely in the dark, forced to watch the broadcast on cable news like the rest of the world. But Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping were given a VIP pre-notification. This is what intelligence analysts refer to as the pre-notification protocol. It is the exact same terrifying pattern that nuclear-armed states use right before they make a massive world-altering strategic maneuver. By contacting Moscow and Beijing first, the new military dictatorship in Tehran wasn't just giving them a heads up. They were actively activating a shadow alliance. They were proving to the world that Iran has built a massive, impenetrable international architecture designed to completely insulate them from American consequences. And the message they are feeding to this shadow alliance is absolutely brilliant in its deception. The Iranian Foreign Ministry didn't just stumble into a press conference this week. They released a highly calculated, carefully weaponized statement specifically engineered for Russian and Chinese consumption. They aren't framing this war as a desperate defense of their illegal nuclear enrichment sites. They aren't talking about uranium centrifuges or ballistic missiles. Instead, the Iranian diplomats explicitly accused the United States of launching this catastrophic war to intentionally partition the country, slice up its sovereign territory, and permanently steal its massive reserves of crude oil. I need you to listen to that phrasing again: partition and oil. That is not a random rhetorical flourish. That is a deeply psychological, highly infectious narrative. Because framing American military intentions purely as an imperialistic, bloodthirsty land grab for natural resources is the exact same propaganda narrative that Beijing and Moscow have been aggressively pumping into their own domestic media ecosystems for over 20 years. Iran is brilliantly handing China and Russia the ultimate geopolitical blank check. They are telling them, do not look at this as us building a nuclear bomb. Look at this as the American empire trying to steal the world's most oil-rich region right out from under you. If that specific narrative takes root in the halls of the Kremlin and the Chinese Communist Party, it provides them with the absolute perfect moral and political cover to actively intervene in this war. It changes this from a localized Middle Eastern conflict into the opening, terrifying act of World War III. And while this shadow alliance is quietly clicking into place, the United States is currently projecting a level of catastrophic weakness on the global stage that we have not seen in modern human history. We are watching the real-time, irreversible collapse of American deterrence. Let me explain exactly how humiliating the last 48 hours have been for the leadership in Washington. Just a day before the Iranian Assembly was forced to name the new leader, the sitting president of the United States issued one of the most unprecedented, arrogant, and publicly binding statements ever recorded in modern diplomacy. He went on social media and broadcast to the entire planet that the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei was, and I quote him directly, unacceptable to me. He guaranteed the world that the new Iranian leader would not last long without his personal approval. He drew a massive, blazing red line in the sand, essentially daring the Iranian military to cross it. A sitting American president attempted to publicly dictate the leadership succession of a foreign hostile nation while actively bombing them. And what did the IRGC do? They looked at that American red line, laughed, and immediately crossed it without a second of hesitation. They installed the exact man the United States president just declared completely unacceptable. And they did it on global television, forcing the entire world to watch America get its bluff called. The sequence of events is a public, agonizing humiliation of American military and diplomatic credibility. But the truly terrifying part is the president's response. When a world leader draws a red line and the enemy steps right over it, you have to act or your words become completely meaningless. Yet, when confronted with this blatant defiance, the president didn't launch a new wave of strikes. He didn't escalate. He simply posted 4 pathetic, defeated words. We'll see what happens. I want you to really think about the catastrophic ripple effect of those 4 words. We'll see what happens. You are not just watching an isolated story about Iranian politics. You are watching a live demonstration of what happens when the global security architecture completely fraught actors Do you think Kim Jong-un isn't watching this? Do you think the Chinese military commanders looking across the strait at Taiwan aren't taking meticulous notes? The lesson that every single rogue state and hostile power on Earth is absorbing right this very second is that American red lines are completely imaginary. The lesson is that if you harden your position, dig in your heels, and simply refuse to give ground, the United States will eventually blink. The era of undeniable American global dominance didn't end with a massive nuclear exchange. It ended with a social media post saying, "We'll see what happens." And because the American geopolitical shield has cracked, the war is no longer staying contained to the Middle East. It has already silently crossed the ocean, and it is actively probing the digital infrastructure of the town you live in. In the last 72 hours, highly classified, unconfirmed reports have started violently circulating through private cybersecurity networks, detailing massive, synchronized anomalous data spikes hitting Western power grids, municipal water treatment facilities, and regional banking hubs. We are not talking about full-scale blackouts yet. We are talking about digital recon. We are talking about state-sponsored Iranian hacker syndicates operating with absolute impunity, quietly jiggling the digital door handles of American civilian infrastructure. They are sending a crystal clear, terrifying message directly to the Pentagon. They are saying, you might be able to drop stealth bombs on our military bases, but we can completely turn off the lights, shut off the water, and freeze the bank accounts in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. The front line of this war is no longer in the desert. The front line is the power meter attached to the side of your house. The invisible digital war has already begun, and the government is absolutely terrified to tell you just how vulnerable you really are. But the clock is ticking, and what happens in the next 72 hours is going to push us entirely past the point of no return. Now, I need you to pause for a second and look away from the flashing military maps. Forget the tactical drone strikes, forget the bunker buster munitions, and forget the political theater unfolding in the clandestine bunkers of Tehran for just 1 minute. If you are sitting at home right now watching this video on your phone or your laptop, thinking that this is just another distant, isolated geopolitical crisis that will stay neatly confined to the scorching sand and skies of the Middle East, you are walking blindly into a financial slaughterhouse. The mainstream media is keeping your eyes entirely focused on the fiery explosions, because explosions generate incredible television ratings. They desperately want you completely mesmerized by the flashing lights and dramatic press briefings of Operation Epic Fury, so that you don't look down and realize that the economic ground beneath your own family's security is actively crumbling into dust. The real war, the one that is going to fundamentally alter the trajectory of your life, the security of your retirement, and your ability to literally feed your family next month, is not being fought with stealth bombers. It is a calculated, devastating economic siege, and the opening salvos have already been fired directly into your bank account. Hours after Mojtaba Khamenei's shadow coronation was solidified by the heavy weaponry of the military brass, a senior IRGC commander stepped up to a microphone and issued a chilling, highly targeted broadcast on regional networks. He didn't threaten to launch more ballistic missiles at American bases in Iraq. He didn't brag about secret underground nuclear enrichment facilities. Instead, he looked dead into the camera and promised an unmitigated, catastrophic, and intentional energy war. I need you to understand exactly what that two-word phrase means. In the dark, blood-soaked lexicon of the Persian Gulf, because they are, without a doubt, the two most dangerous words any global macroeconomist can possibly hear. When the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps promises an energy war, they are talking about one very specific, incredibly narrow, highly vulnerable strip of blue water. They are talking about the Strait of Hormuz, Picture the Strait of Hormuz not merely as a body of water, but as the literal pulsating jugular vein of the modern, interconnected, globalized world. Approximately 1/5 of the entire planet's daily liquid fuel supply has to physically squeeze through that 39-mile-wide geographic choke point. Every single day, massive, slow-moving supertankers carrying the absolute lifeblood of the Western economy are forced to navigate those highly contested waters. If the Iranian military decides to silently drop naval mines into that strait, or if they sink a single commercial cargo vessel to block the deepwater shipping lanes, or honestly, if they even just credibly threaten to deploy their infamous swarm boat anti-ship missiles, the physical flow of global energy flatlines. It stops, and the terrifying unspoken truth of the global markets is that they don't even have to actually close the strait to send the world into a spiraling, inescapable economic depression. The mere psychological terror of a credible disruption threat is more than enough to detonate the commodities markets. Let's do the brutal, unforgiving math that the polished cable news anchors are currently too terrified to display on their interactive digital smartboards. Before this entire nightmare kicked off just 10 short days ago, the price of Brent crude oil was sitting comfortably at around $64 a barrel. It was a stable, predictable, highly manageable market. As I am recording this very sentence right now, we have just violently smashed straight through the $100 threshold. That is an explosive 56% increase in the baseline cost of global energy in less than 2 weeks. But believe me when I tell you, that is absolute child's play compared to what every single serious financial model is predicting will happen over the next 72 hours. If the IRGC executes their stated energy war protocol, conservative analytical projections from the most respected, battle-tested financial institutions on Earth show crude oil rocketing to between $140 and $180 a barrel, almost instantly. The algorithms will take over, the panic buying will commence, and the price will completely detach from reality. So, what does $180 oil actually mean for you, the average hardworking citizen watching this video? It means the number you see scrolling on the digital display at your local gas station is going to shatter historical records, soaring to $7, $8, or even $9 a gallon before the end of this month. But the nightmare doesn't stop at the gas pump. Our entire modern civilization is structurally built on the back of cheap diesel fuel. If the cost to fuel an 18-wheeler delivery truck doubles overnight, the cost of literally every single item sitting on the shelves of your local grocery store doubles right along with it. We are talking about hyper-accelerated runaway inflation that will make the economic struggles of the last few years look like a golden era of unbridled prosperity. The supply chain costs for corporate agriculture, life-saving pharmaceuticals, basic consumer goods, and critical manufacturing will skyrocket so violently fast that massive corporations will have absolutely no choice but to instantly pass that suffocating financial burden directly down to you. And if you think this is just theoretical clickbait fear-mongering, you are willfully ignoring the massive dominoes that are already violently crashing down across the international landscape. Just this morning, the state-run oil company of the nation of Bahrain officially declared force majeure. If you don't happen to work in high-level corporate contract law, let me translate what force majeure means. It is the legal equivalent of pulling the emergency fire alarm and sprinting out of a burning building. It is a catastrophic emergency declaration stating that an event is so massive, so completely out of control, that they are legally voiding their international supply contracts. They physically cannot deliver the energy they previously sold because Iranian proxy strikes have completely paralyzed their domestic refinery infrastructure and disabled their critical water desalination plants. Force majeure declarations are historically incredibly rare occurrences. When they happen in the absolute center of the energy sector, it is the ultimate geopolitical distress signal. It means the intricate, fragile web of global supply chains is actively snapping right eye. In front of our eyes, look up at the sky. According to the absolute latest data scraping from global aviation trackers, over 14,000 commercial flights have been abruptly canceled or indefinitely grounded since the initial American strikes commenced. Major international airlines are aggressively and frantically redrawing their global flight maps, utterly terrified of sending passenger jets loaded with civilians through airspace that is currently saturated with electronic warfare, jamming signals, and unannounced ballistic missile trajectories. The skies over the entirety of the Middle East are rapidly emptying out, which is systematically severing critical cargo and logistics arteries between the massive manufacturing hubs of Europe and Asia. But here is the absolute craziest part of this entire economic horror story. This is the massive blazing red flag that nobody in the traditional media is investigating. This is the exact detail that convinced me this was a coordinated, premeditated setup from the very beginning. If you dig deep beneath the surface level retail trading noise and focus strictly on massive dark pool institutional volume, a genuinely terrifying pattern emerges. In the 48 hours immediately preceding the start of Operation Epic Fury, before a single bomb was ever dropped, before the global public had any clue what the White House was actively planning, anomalous multi-billion-dollar short positions were quietly and methodically taken out against the global aviation and maritime shipping sectors. Somebody knew. Elite, shadowy, sovereign wealth funds moving massive pools of completely untraceable capital placed astronomical bets that the global supply chain was about to violently fracture. They positioned themselves perfectly to make billions of dollars off the exact economic collapse we are watching unfold right this second. Why? The middle class, is about to get completely wiped out by $9 gasoline and doubled grocery bills. The global financial elite utilized advanced warning of this horrific war to quietly protect their vast wealth and actively profit off the sheer panic of the masses. And what about your hard-earned wealth? If you have a 401k, a Roth IRA, or any kind of pension heavily tied to the broader stock market, you are standing directly on the fault line of this impending financial earthquake. While defense contractors and short-term energy stocks might see a brief, violent, speculative surge, the broader equities market simply cannot survive a prolonged, systemic energy shock of this magnitude. When the average consumer completely runs out of discretionary income to buy anything other than basic survival necessities, corporate earnings will implode across the board. That implosion will trigger a massive wave of corporate layoffs, accelerating a vicious, unstoppable cycle of global recession that will completely gut retirement accounts literally overnight. The Iranian military brass knows exactly what they're doing. They fully realize they cannot beat the United States military in a conventional, head-to-head, boots-on-the-ground war. But they also know they absolutely do not have to. They are deploying a brilliant, ruthless, financial, asymmetric warfare strategy. By holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage, they have successfully rigged a global economic bomb. And they are holding the detonator directly in front of the American president's face. They are betting everything on the assumption that the American public will eventually beg their leaders to retreat once the financial pain becomes too excruciating to bear. And as this terrifying domestic panic starts to set in, a much darker, much more dangerous geopolitical alliance is moving silently in the background, preparing to strike while America is completely blinded by the chaos. Look, if you went to sleep last night thinking the worst of this Middle Eastern crisis was finally in the rearview mirror, you need to wake up, grab a coffee, and pay very close attention to what I am about to show you. At exactly 2:17 a.m. on the East Coast, the entire global geopolitical chessboard got violently flipped over. And the mainstream networks, they are doing everything in their power to make sure you don't realize the gravity of it until it's far too late. I am talking about a complete, coordinated media sanitization of the actual terrifying implications of what just went down in Tehran. You have probably scrolled past the generic headlines this morning, things like Iran appoints new leader or succession complete in the Islamic Republic. The anchors are reading these updates in the exact same tone they used to report on corporate board changes. They are desperately trying to make it sound orderly. They are making it sound like a standard bureaucratic transition. Let me assure you it was not. What actually transpired in the dead of the night wasn't a peaceful passing of the torch. It was a hostile, heavily armed, flawlessly executed military coup conducted right under the blind eyes of Western intelligence agencies. And this silent takeover fundamentally alters the survival timeline for every single American service member currently stationed within 1,000 miles of the Persian Gulf. I am going to break down the exact leaked translation of the new Supreme Leader's very first national address, the specific ultra-aggressive words that cable news executives are actively choosing not to play for you. But before we get to that chilling broadcast, we have to expose the massive, catastrophic miscalculation that the White House made exactly 11 days ago. Let's rewind the tape to February 28th, Operation Epic Fury. The United States and Israel unleash an unprecedented wave of stealth bombers and precision munitions, vaporizing over 2,000 targets. They drop the hammer on the compound in Tehran and eliminate the Supreme Leader, a man who had been the undisputed face of the regime for nearly 4 decades. The celebrations in Washington were immediate. The champagne was popped in the briefing rooms. The narrative being aggressively pushed to you, the taxpayer, was that the ultimate decapitation strike had been achieved. The theory was simple, almost childishly optimistic. Cut off the head of the snake, and the regime's body will simply wither and die. But anyone who actually studies the anatomy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps could have told them the fatal flaw in that logic. By taking out the aging, predictable old guard, the United States didn't destroy the regime. They just helped the beast shed its slow, decaying skin. They inadvertently cleared the stage for a monster that had been waiting patiently in the basement for 20 years. The man who just took absolute control of 90 million people is not a diplomat. He is not a politician. In fact, he isn't even a legitimate religious scholar. His name is Mojtaba Khamenei. If you dig into the deeply classified intelligence profiles, the ones buried beneath layers of redacted black ink, you won't find a history of public sermons or diplomatic handshakes. You will find the architect of Iran's darkest black ops. For 2 decades, while his father stood at the podiums screaming about the West, Mojtaba was completely invisible, operating exclusively in the shadows to weaponize the IRGC's intelligence wing. He is the ghost in the machine. He was the invisible hand directing the Basij paramilitaries, the brutal enforcers who have historically crushed internal Iranian uprisings with a level of clinical violence that makes international watchdogs sick to their stomachs. Keep his background in the back of your mind, because it connects directly to a terrifying economic shockwave that I am going to expose in just a few minutes. But right now, you need to understand the profound constitutional crisis that just unfolded and why it proves that the clerics are no longer in charge of Iran. By the strict foundational laws of the Islamic Republic, the Supreme Leader absolutely must hold the elevated scholarly rank of Ayatollah. It is the non-negotiable prerequisite for the job. Mojtaba does not hold that rank. He dropped out of the traditional religious spotlight to play spy master. So how does an unqualified radical spy master take the absolute religious throne in the middle of a hot war with the United States? Because the assembly of experts, the 88 clerics who are legally supposed to vote on this, essentially had the geopolitical equivalent of a gun pressed against their temples. The IRGC didn't wait for a religious consensus. They used the smoking rubble of the American airstrikes as the ultimate smokescreen. They surrounded the political apparatus, sidelined the traditional religious establishment, and unilaterally installed their own puppet. The military didn't just pledge allegiance to the new leader, they manufactured him. The organization that controls the ballistic missiles, the drone factories, and the proxy terror networks now has absolute unchecked control over the entire government. The theocracy is dead. A radicalized military dictatorship has just taken its place, and they are using the American strikes to justify their absolute authority. And that brings us to the midnight broadcast itself. When Iranian state TV cut the regular feed, the translated clips pushed to American audiences showed a stern leader making generic promises about standing strong. It sounded like standard political theater, but I got my hands on the raw, unedited Farsi transcript, verified by independent, underground, open source intelligence analysts. The language he used wasn't defensive. It was predatory. He didn't promise to merely resist the West. He used a highly specific, historically loaded phrase that translates roughly to inflicting an irreversible bone-shattering fracture on the jaw of the American empire. But wait, it actually gets worse. Much worse. Mojtaba looked directly into the camera and confidently declared that the Islamic Republic had already achieved a definitive historic victory in the first 10 days of this conflict. He wasn't speaking metaphorically, he started listing the receipts. He weaponized the confirmed deaths of American personnel in the Gulf, framing their spilled blood as a triumphant milestone. He pointed to the blazing regional oil infrastructure and the panicked late-night evacuation orders sent to U.S. diplomats in neighboring allied countries. He took every single piece of American suffering from the past week and mounted it on his wall as a trophy in his very first public address. And then he dropped the absolute final hammer. He completely eliminated any possibility of a backroom diplomatic off-ramp. He stated with zero ambiguity that Iran's ultimate non-negotiable war aim is the total, unconditional eviction of every single American military asset from the entire Middle East. Every base, every warship, every soldier. Let that sink in for a second. That is not a bargaining chip. That is a declaration of total, uncompromising war. The White House thought they were ending a conflict 10 days ago. Instead, they unknowingly handed the keys of a heavily armed nation directly to its most violent, unhinged military faction. The peace window hasn't just closed. The IRGC just welded it shut. But if you think this is just a foreign policy disaster happening thousands of miles away, you are gravely mistaken. Because the very next move this new regime is preparing to make isn't aimed at a military base. It is aimed directly at your wallet, your savings, and your ability to feed your family.